Kalispera, boa tarde, Yakshanlar, good afternoon, and welcome to the webinar on the East Med in Turkey during Portugal's EU presidency. My name is Ekrem Edigüzeldere. I'm a non-resident research fellow with ELIAMEP, and I'm greeting you from super rainy and cool Berlin, where I'm usually based. I have been organizing this webinar together with Professor Isabel David from the Orient Institute of Lisbon University. We met about 10 years ago in Turkey during a trip from Istanbul, Ankara to Gaziantep while Professor David was still preparing or writing her PhD. It's a nice occasion that our paths crossed again in this organization of this webinar. We were thinking for quite some time of doing something during the Portuguese EU presidency. At first, we thought we'd do it at the beginning of the presidency in January, but then changed plans. And now we are doing it on the last day of the presidency as a kind of evaluation. The lineup in the program and in the invitation is in alphabetical order, but we will change this order, and we'll start with Rui Vinhas from the Portuguese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, followed by Professor Wolfgang Wessels, then to MEP Paulo Rangel, who hopefully will still join us. And then we move to Ankara to Eva Horelova from the EU delegation. And while preparing this webinar, it became quickly clear that there are very few experts on bilateral relations, and the knowledge is quite little on the state of Turkey-Portuguese relations. And so we will have, I think, the only accredited Portuguese journalist in Turkey, José Tavares, who will finish the speaker lineup with a presentation on the bilateral relations. Before handing over to Isabel, I would like to say to those who are watching us on YouTube, Facebook, that you can there write your comments or questions, and we will receive them here and ask them to the speakers. Now over to Isabel.
Thank you, Ekrem. In fact, it is a pleasure to be here helping organize this seminar. Today we will be beginning with Ambassador Rui Vinhas, who is Director General of European Affairs at the Portuguese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And we will give him the floor with, I would say, eight minutes to give us your thoughts and your comments on this important topic and on the Portuguese presidency, which finishes today. Thank you very much for being with us, Ambassador Rui Vinhas. It is a pleasure to have you here, and thank you for finding the time during this very busy day, I'm sure, to talk to us about this issue. Thank you very much, and welcome again. You are mute.
I'm sorry. Well, thank you very much for your words, and thank you for the invitation and for having me in replacing the Secretary of State, Ana Paula Zacarias. She was unable, and I just knew that I had to step in yesterday evening, so I will make some brief comments. I will try. I mean, I'm the only Thai around, so I will try to act accordingly. Also, 8 or 9 hours to finish the presidency, so I will try to be restrained and disciplined. I mean, maybe I will make 2 or 3 comments on Turkey, the presidency objectives, and where are we after the last European Council last week? I mean, on Turkey, I mean, the most common word we listen is that is a challenge to the European Union. One of the biggest challenge that the European Union has to deal with in foreign policy. That is, I mean, that is a fact, but that is something. The relations with the South are also a challenge. Relations with Eastern neighbors are quite challenging, particularly with Russia, but not only. Even the relation with our friends, partners, and allies in the other side of the Atlantic are also a challenge. We just had very challenging 4 years before January. So, I mean, sometimes in the EU we are a bit framed by the way the EU does business, and we forget how traditional international relations and foreign policy are conducted around the world. And of course there are problems, of course there are concerns, of course there are difficulties, but sometimes it's important to have this in mind. Within the EU, we do business in other way, but when we deal with third countries, we have to adapt to a different reality. So on a second comment on the Portuguese presidency. Basically, we are all familiar with the institutional architecture that resulted from Lisbon Treaty, and Turkey, by its importance, is being dealt in the Foreign Affairs Council and particularly by the European Council itself. So it's that is a clear demonstration of the importance of Turkey to the European Union. But both these two bodies, both decision-making bodies of the European Union, are not shared by the rotating presidency. Anyway, in the beginning, in January, our objective concerning Turkey was, of course, to seek a de-escalation of tension and a normalization in our relations, and to try to explore creative avenues to maintain the EU engage with Turkey and a positive agenda. I think these were very broad political aims from the presidency, and we have worked in close coordination with the High Representative and with the President of the European Council, and I think broadly these objectives have been achieved. I mean, we have had a very tough, very difficult 2020 in what relations with Turkey concern. But since the end of 2020, we witnessed positive signs coming from the side of Turkey, the escalation in Eastern Mediterranean, also expressing willing to talk both with Greece and Cyprus, and that was also a very positive sign, and that has allowed us to, since the European Council of March, and now restated in this European Council in June, to design this sort of dual approach with Turkey, and I will go into that. So. Then, I mean, also in terms of parameters, there is no doubt whatsoever about the importance of the relationship with Turkey. I mean, there are nuances within the Council of the European Union on member states, but there's no doubt that the European Union is a very important and strategic partner. So the two parameters are basically that Turkey remains a candidate country, and it is a key partner. So we want to preserve and develop a strategic cooperation on a mutually beneficial relationship. So on this basis, and also building upon the good and positive signs coming from Ankara, we have decided in the last two European Councils to to design this two dual approach in the relation with Turkey, basically to engage in a phased and proportionate and reversible manner in a positive agenda. This positive agenda is basically includes three different layers. One is high-level political contacts to discuss issues of mutual interest, and these are basically the big global agendas like climate and health, for instance, but also to discuss security, counterterrorism, for instance, and also the regional issues, Syria, Libya, etc. Then we have an economic dimension, in which is because the economic ties with Turkey are very strong between the European Union and Turkey, in which the modernization of the customs union is a highlight or a high point. On this, the presidency, the rotating presidency, the Portuguese presidency still has a specific role. The preparatory the bodies that deal with this issue are shared by the presidency, and what I can share is that we have started the technical work on a mandate for the modernization of the EU-Turkey customs union. As you know, this is a very complex and difficult issue, both in technical and political dimensions. So it will be a long process, but the kickoff was done by the Portuguese presidency, and so we will be. The other dimension is, of course, people-to-people contacts and mobility. But the other important issue that we have in our hands, and there was a clear mandate from the European Council to the Commission, or a request to the Commission, is to present a proposal on how we can renew the agreement on migrants/refugees that we had in the previous 5 years with Turkey. That's also a very important element in this approach to Turkey, and clearly mutual interest. And I'm sure that we will come back to that very soon, and the Commission will present in the incoming weeks a proposal to be discussed then in the Council. So then we have Cyprus, is the issue of Cyprus, in which there were talks, bilateral talks, talks under the auspices of the UN. No breakthrough or no progress was made, but it's very important that if we look a few months, if we look to a few months to 2020, for instance, the atmospherics were quite different. There was no dialogue. There was a very tense atmosphere, unilateral actions, a very tough rhetoric. So we now have dialogue, meetings, and the parties are talking, and of course there are differences on the positions. We continue within the European Union to be interested in an agreement on the basis of the UN resolutions on a bicommunal and bizonal federation with the political equality. The Turkish government has a different approach, two-state solutions. We defend the two-state solutions in another very difficult dossier, but not for Cyprus. So this is where we stand. But I know that the UN is ready to engage if there is a political will from the parties, and this is of course a key issue, because it links, even the customs union issue is of course linked to these to developments on Cyprus, and all many other issues related even with the Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean Sea, and the drilling are also linked to a solution and an outcome on the Cyprus question. So this is where we stand. I mean, positive outlook. Clearly, we will engage with Turkey in this positive agenda, but of course, we didn't exclude to come back to a more firm or even to adopt any restrictive measures if there is a pushback from Turkey on this. So that's why we call it reversible and phased. But if in terms of assessment of these 6 months, we think that we made progress and we are in a much better position than we were in the end of 2020. So I'll be in this. That's what I wanted to state now, and I'll be ready to questions, comments, or to step in if needed at any stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, also for staying almost in the time limit. We will continue with Professor Wolfgang Wessels, who is the director of the Center for Turkey and European Studies at the University of Cologne since 2016. He's also the vice president of the consortium for the foundation of the Turkish-German University in Istanbul, and the academic leader of the program European and International Affairs at this very university. He coordinates research projects Viaduct and Turkey as an energy hub, and of special interest for this event is also that he is the academic coordinator of TRAC, which stands for Teaching and Researching the European Council, Enhancing and Disseminating Knowledge on a Key Institution in Challenging Times. And now we are interested to hear your evaluation of the 6 months Portuguese presidency. The floor is yours. Please.
Thank you for inviting me. First of all, I would like to say that I have the same reading like our Portuguese speaker on the progress which was made in the last half year. My speciality, if you want, is to read the conclusions of the European Council, because the European Council is defining the strategic interests of the European Union. That's in the Lisbon Treaty, and we know how important that is. I would draw your attention also to the issue that, of course, the European Parliament and the Commission play also an important role. We should not forget that. But I would stress a little bit the, let's say, conclusions of the European Council over the time. That means from the 90s onwards, and especially in the last decade or so. I will be very short on that and refer to the conclusions of the June session of the European Council. In a long durée perspective, in the June conclusions, we miss any mentioning of the accession process. So let's say at least there's no proposal to open a new chapter. But we see also a leitmotif, which is there since always. That means the rule of law and the defense of the fundamental rights. The issue for me in this mentioning is how far is this a political precondition, for example, for looking at the modernization of the customs union. I think the European Parliament claims very much in their resolution, or its resolution, that this political precondition, if you want, the first Copenhagen criteria, is taken very seriously. So let's say we will see that the European Parliament might be more stressing this point than perhaps the European Council. Though it's certainly mentioned, and the European Council said it will keep watching this issue. The starting point of the conclusion is very much to the conclusions of the last year. That means, I quote now, that there is a strategic interest in a stable and secure environment in the Eastern Mediterranean, and in the development of a cooperative and mutually beneficial relationship with Turkey. So there is no mentioning of what you might call strategic partnership. So certainly many have this in mind, but the term is not in this formulation. The red line, the starting point, and I think that was mentioned quite often by Rui, is that the starting point is a de-escalation in the Eastern Mediterranean. That means that the conflicts are not put on the agenda directly. They are still there, of course. We just heard a little bit about Cyprus, but of course also about gas trading in the Eastern Mediterranean. But apparently the European Council is sufficiently satisfied with the present state. I come back to that. Then they have a very careful approach, also that was mentioned by Rui, to engage with Turkey, now I quote again, in a phased, proportional and reversible manner. That means they keep a close watch on actions of Turkey to stop or even reverse perhaps the processes which are there. Then there are the carrots. They were mentioned as the positive agenda, a modernization of the customs union. But it was already mentioned that this is a difficult process because the conclusions directly tell us after ensuring its effective application to all member states. And I guess you all understand that this is a Cyprus issue coming up, and that even that on the technical basis, perhaps there might be progresses. I think that might be a very difficult political threshold to cross, but that's speculation at the moment. The other carrots were also mentioned by Rui. These are the high-level dialogues on issues of mutual interest that here mentioned. There are certain issues mentioned. I didn't see anymore the people-to-people contact which were in the conclusions of former times, but I guess that's not as important. It was mentioned a couple of times. Now health problems clearly seen with the pandemic. So I think that's something on the offer. It's for me not very clear how high this level will be. Will there be a meeting by the two presidents again with the Turkish president or even by all 17? We have just heard how difficult this would be in a high-level meeting with Russia. There was a major threat of unity or a major disturbance at the last European Council meeting when France and Germany had proposed that. So the question is, on which level is this high level at the end? There's also mentioned as, let's say, the worries, the settlement of the Cyprus problem, we heard about that. I mentioned the rule of law and the fundamental rights in Turkey remain a key concern, and that expects Turkey and all actors to contribute positively in the resolution of regional crisis. Resolution of regional crisis, of course, concerns, of course, especially, I guess, Syria, but also Libya, Iraq, perhaps Armenia. So let's say this is certainly on the agenda, but with no clearer perspective or clear strategy in this point. There is no mentioning of the stick directly. Rui mentioned the term restrictive measures, which are a word for sanctions. This term is not mentioned in this conclusion. It was mentioned in the conclusions, not the last one, but the one before. So this was more the threat of sanctions. This apparently has been dropped. I think one of the key points is that if you use a German word, this issue will remain a Chefsache. That means an issue for the bosses. The European Council mentioned that in the relation with the mandate for upgrading the customs union, and the general term, it will remain seized by the matter. So let's say European Council will take that more seriously. I guess that Eva might tell us a little bit more about the background, let's say also negotiation within the European Council, between those like the Germans who wanted to look for the refugee issue. I come back to that in 1 minute. And others who would perhaps like to have more the restrictive measures. But I mean, that's what you get out of the press. I don't know how this was really dealt with or discussed in the meeting itself. A major point then is the question of financing the settlement of refugees in Turkey and in other areas. Jordania was mentioned in this case also. I think that's really where a major interest of the EU is, and where, let's say, also, if you want some kind of leverage of the Turkish side is. So Turkey has their certain instrument, and of course everybody wants that this instrument is not directly used, but that this, of course, in the mind of many people, and therefore to ask for fast settlement of further financing of the refugees living in Turkey. I think that's a major issue and remains a major preoccupation of the EU side. How can you now interpret this? My argument would be this document, compared with the documents the last 2-3 years, signals a phase of careful search for a modus vivendi, which is based on a package balancing different interests inside the European Council. I mentioned them, and that there is a careful way of finding ways to work together with Turkey on interests of issues of mutual interest. I think that's highly important to see that this is the way forward. It's not developing a very broad issue or broad picture of partnership. It's not developing a strategic partnership with specific timetables, but it tries to deal with the situation as it is and to incrementally develop a better relationship. So this is very much with a question mark, depending very much, as the European Council at least would see, on the actions of Turkey. So we will see there is, let's say, a short-term view. It's an incremental step-by-step process, which is, let's say, how the European Council works in many ways. But there is not the longer-term perspective, at least not in the text. I think that I would like to stress. It's a kind of truth, if you want, and that, as I said, depends very much on dealing with fundamental problems. I think the Cyprus problems will stay with us for a long time. I don't see any move to get over it. We can hope, at least for those who are not directly involved, like perhaps our Cyprus friends, that this can be dealt with without too much impact on other forms of cooperation with Turkey. But that's a very open question also how the Cyprus and perhaps Greece government will play with this issue, concerning, especially in this case, the modernization of the customs union. The question is also, I would like to draw your attention, and that was also during the Portuguese presidency, to more the international context. I think one is clearly that with Biden as US president, the EU is in better terms to look for shared problems, and Turkey would be one shared challenge. And I think that's in some way or other reinforcing the EU positions more than perhaps with the former president. I think that's a fact. The other one is that the EU has major problems with Russia. And here the question how Turkey plays with this issue, how far Russia can be sold to the EU as a possible substitute for EU and Western support. I think that's difficult because, as I see it from the outside, there are a lot of diverging interests between Turkey and Russia. But we should not underestimate this kind of issue. My last point would be, and addressing perhaps to José, who will come in later, what is the impact of this position in the Turkish domestic debate? Is this giving some kind of support for the present president? Or is this, let's say, seen as a sign by opposition parties, perhaps the more liberal groups? Is this a support for the liberal groups in some way or other, or a disappointment? That, let's say, for example, the question of fundamental rights and rule of law are not stressed more in the text, and that accession is not mentioned at all. So I have open question concerning the impact on the domestic level, which I think is very crucial for the EU, because it has to see how far this offer, this double track with carrots, but also sticks in mind, can really work with the present government in Turkey, and how far this can then help to deal with de-escalation, to deal with common approaches to interests of mutual interest, so with issues of mutual interest. That would be my open questions, especially on looking at the internal domestic debate in Turkey. Thank you very much, Chairman.
We thank you, Mr. Professor Wessels. Since Mr. Rangel has not shown up, we will now move to Ankara, to the European Union delegation, and Eva Horelova, who is leading the political section there, representing both the EU and its citizen, as well as reporting on Turkey's foreign policy and domestic development. At the European External Action Service, she also covered Syria, and at the Czech Foreign Affairs Ministry, Eva covered the Eastern Partnership. Now, also, as already Ambassador Vinjas said, the 2020 were very difficult year for the bilateral relations, very tense, lots of confrontations, especially in the East Med between EU member states and Turkey. And since late 2020, there has been a process of normalization or improving their relations, including a de-escalation also in the East Med. So my question to you would be, how were these last 6 months seen in Ankara concerning the bilateral Turkey-EU relations? Thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. I guess most of our speakers and also viewers are somewhere in the time zone in the afternoon. And greetings from Ankara. And first and foremost, congratulations to the Portuguese colleagues, be it in Lisbon, in Porto, in Brussels, and in Ankara as well. I will react a bit to what the speakers, Ambassador Vinjas and also Professor Wessels, has already been very well describing what has been happening in the past 6 months, and also the broader context. So I would like to underline that despite the presidency role was dramatically changed in foreign policy area since the Lisbon Treaty, there are still some areas where the presidency has a very important, indispensable role also locally. And here in Ankara specifically, or around the world, it's, for example, the coordination of the local consular cooperation. And the Portuguese colleagues also took the lead to finally formulate the so-called joint consular framework. So I know that the consular issues do not always feature on the high political debates, but these are very important and indispensable for citizens in the third countries. And the functioning consular cooperation among the member states is very important. And this is also something that we actually saw during the onset of the pandemics in spring 2020, because it was the consular and trade colleagues in the embassies who were really making sure that the citizens were able to return to their home countries, making sure that the trade between the countries didn't stop flowing. So I would like to also underline these maybe sometimes unsung heroes of international diplomacy, and these are the consular officers. But of course, also the political role of the Portuguese presidency in terms of supporting the leadership of the External Action Service and the HRVP on the Foreign Affairs Council, and also of the colleagues in the European Council on working on these conclusions and negotiating these conclusions, I think was also very appreciated in the EU headquarters in Brussels. Professor Wessel also already underlined this question of this conditionality of this reverse phased proportionate engagement on this offered positive agenda. And Professor Wessels also underlined the institutional role, for example, of the European Commission, in particular in the area for human rights and rule of law and the broader package of the Copenhagen criteria. I would like to also recall that the Portuguese presidency is part of a trio, and this trio had been preceded by the German presidency, and now, as of tomorrow, the Portuguese presidency will be followed by the Slovenian presidency. And the European Commission, I would really like to stress, is fulfilling all her duties on being very clear as to Turkish progress or lack of progress on implementing of the so-called Copenhagen criteria. These are mostly in the area of stability of institutions guaranteeing democracy, and also a very important area of human rights, fundamental freedoms, rule of law area. And recalling also back that the European Commission issued a report on Turkey's enlargement work back in October 2019, I would like to underline that there has never been council conclusions of the General Affairs Council, so there has never been a member state promulgation on this report. And I think this is something that has been missing, that was originally work that should have been done by the German presidency, but for many political reasons, the Portuguese presidency decided not to follow on that work either. And I think that's part of the issue, that we so to say end up with the council conclusions of the European Council that are focusing on the Eastern Mediterranean and on Turkey in a non-enlargement, non-candidate country, non-accession framework. So if we had also these conclusions on the annual report, that would be clearly stating the member states' basically position on the Turkey as a candidate country, that might have been helpful also in terms of communicating the EU position locally to Turkish audiences across Turkey as well. The colleagues, as I said, describe very well where we are on these council conclusions. Maybe I will say a bit seen from the ground. There seem to be that we are in a kind of, lock of Turkey being a candidate country, and there are very high expectations from Turkey that the EU should be reacting on that. And the Turkish government is basically not taking into any regard all our comments on the conditionality of the rule of law and human rights that are connected with the candidate country status. So I'm afraid we are also locked a bit in a kind of dialogue of the absurdus, dialogue of the death, that both sides are repeating what their positions are, and the Turkish side not necessarily being very receptive to the EU repetitive messages of what would be needed for the country to make progress on its candidate country accession process negotiations, on a kind of unfrozen of these negotiations as such. So basically where we are is indeed that we maybe focus a little bit too much on the calmness or not calmness in the Eastern Mediterranean and on the other tracks, because the accession track as such is frozen. Nevertheless, even that, the positive offer in terms of progress on the customs union or the high-level dialogues on climate change or the health, despite they had been already made in March by the European Council very publicly in the Council conclusions, I haven't seen much progress by the Turkish administration to really make things happen also internally, at least ahead of the June European Council. Basically, yes, there was calmness in the Eastern Mediterranean, or 99% calmness, but I haven't seen many positive, despite just small step by the Turkish side. So even the joint customs union committee didn't take place of the European Council. Now it should be probably taking place in the next 2 weeks. There has been very little preparations, as I already said, on these two high-level dialogues. So all these issues on the grounds make me feel that eventually there is not that much of a good faith in really moving ahead. What potentially worries me about what also Professor Wessels mentioned regarding keeping the dialogue open also with the civil society and with the Turkish citizens broadly, is that yes, Turkey made enormous progress also in terms of, let's say, Europeanization in the past 10, 15 years. But I'm afraid that after 3 years in Ankara in Turkey, although I could not eventually travel so much across this big, varied country because of the pandemic limitations, I'm a bit afraid that we are a bit losing this attraction of the European Union, which I hope, had. And the frustration, not only of the elite, but of people across the board is a bit growing. And I think that would be really a big problem. There are many, interconnected reasons for that. Yes, it's the unclear institutional framework, unclear European perspective. It's also the limitations on freedoms on the media coverage. So I, for example, very often face the question from many even well-educated interlocutors or well-informed interlocutors, like, Eva, what's your problem? What's your EU problem? Why is Turkey not becoming member of the European Union anytime soon? And I realized that this message of ours, what are really the EU rules and values and what are the prerequisites of a EU membership, is just not really getting across. And of course, I also admit, because of the clarity of the tangibility of this goal, we are also getting problems as well. Notwithstanding, in the past few years, let's admit it, we as the EU, with few of our member states, we are also facing some issues with the rule of law and potentially human rights as well. And that is also a bit diminishing the credibility of the EU offer in the eyes of the Turkish audiences. So despite we also cut some of the funding in the past few years for many reasons, including the situation in the fundamental freedoms, we still keep focus also in line with the request of the European Parliament on funding the civil society, I would say the rules-based civil society, so women organizations and many others. But at the same time, I also have to admit that when we also look at the opposition parties, I don't see using the EU offer and also the EU criticism or feedback on Turkish lack of reforms in terms of EU accession as being used in the political debate. So I'm also a bit worried that this attractiveness of the EU as such is diminishing not only in the society, but also it's diminishing as a potentially changing political power or political argument for the political opposition in Turkey as well. So maybe I would close with that we always say that we are encouraging Turkey to move closer instead of farther away from Europe. And that's still the case. But the ball for action is with Turkey. It's not with the European Union as such.
Thank you very much, Eva Horzalova, and thank you for your intervention. I would like to now give the floor to José Pedro Tavares, who is a Turkey correspondent for Portuguese Weekly Expresso, and also for Antena Radio. So he is based now in Ankara. And thank you also for accepting our invitation. And please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you also for organizing this webinar. Anything that focus on Portugal and Turkey is very close to my heart. I'm a Portuguese national that has been living in Ankara, reporting from Ankara in the last 20 years. My kids are half Turkish, half Portuguese, and therefore I'm very, very happy to speak on something that actually focus on Portugal and Turkey. I think others much more apt than me have analyzed the state of Turkey EU bilateral relations. Indeed, we live challenging times. The image and standing of Turkey has arguably reached a very low point in most European capitals. The challenges have been listed: Eastern Mediterranean and Cyprus, migration stroke refugees, importantly, rule of law, democracy. Within the NATO dimension, the issue of the S-400 missiles and mistrust within NATO. What I would like to focus here maybe is on the bilateral, purely bilateral relationship between Portugal and Turkey, which has mostly an economic dimension these days. Globally, the relations have been very cordial. And Portugal has always supported the Turkish membership or membership of Turkey in the European Union. Unlike some European Union countries, Portugal was always very positive to the idea of Turkey entering the European Union, and always had a very positive contribution to that debate. Some of you may remember some of the processes, the Alliance of Civilizations, in which one former Portuguese president, Jorge Sampaio, actually gave a very good contribution. Both countries have got, in many ways, a worldly approach and a worldly history, and I think that reflected in this mutually positive atmosphere. We are, though, in two different extremes of Europe, Turkey and Portugal. And in fact, the connections are not as strong as with other European countries. We've got a relatively small Turkish community in Portugal. We now have, though, I would like to note this, an important number of Turkish citizens of Jewish Sephardite origin that hold Portuguese passports, and they now number a few thousand, and this is an important opportunity and link between the two countries. I would also like to note the role of Turkish Airlines, as you know, one of the biggest airlines in the world, in the contribution to link the two countries, and mostly what I will speak about, the economic relations between Portugal and Turkey. When I moved to Turkey 20 years ago, there was no direct flight between Porto and Lisbon and Istanbul. Now there is, and that really changed for the better, the relations, the exchanges, the communication, and particularly the business links between the two countries. Business. Well, indeed, these days the bilateral relations are mostly, spelt in the economic realm. Portugal exports to Turkey about 500 million euros a year. Portugal imports from Turkey between 700 and 900 million euros a year of goods. Portugal exports to Turkey mostly vehicles, components, paper, Portuguese paper industry, very, very strong, and also chemicals. We import from Turkey a lot of metal, textiles, some machinery. The balance, the commercial balance, is more favorable to Turkey. So we import more from Turkey than we export. That's not really a surprise given the size of the economy of the two countries. Foreign investment. There are 11 Portuguese companies present in Turkey. But more importantly, there are many more Turkish companies present in Portugal, and that starts to represent a significant foreign direct investment in Portugal. Most of the Portuguese ports, maritime ports, are now managed by a Turkish company, which has invested already 500 million euros and is planning to invest another 500 million euros. And this is significant because many of our exports go through ports, and these ports are managed by a company called Yilport. They manage 7 of the Portuguese maritime seaports. The largest Portuguese cement company, Simpor, was bought by a Turkish company, Oyak Cimento, another significant foreign investment, Turkish foreign investment in Portugal. And then there is a wealth of companies investing in Portugal, increasingly so. Real estate, a very large empty area in Cascais was very recently bought by a Turkish company for real estate development. Pharmaceutical companies, walnut. You all know that Turkey is one of the main producers in the world of dried fruits, and now they are investing on producing walnuts in Portugal. Minerals, mining, very important in Turkey. There's been a national debate in Portugal about mining lithium and so on. There's Turkish companies interested in investing in lithium in Portugal, and this is significant and positive. I think that focusing on the economy, particularly at bilateral level, Portugal-Turkey, can give a positive and in political ways neutral contribution to the improvement of relations and the improvement of standing of Turkey within the EU. So from a purely bilateral point of view, the renewing of the customs union would be very, very important for the strengthening of these business ties. But overall, challenging times from a political point of view. Relatively thriving and positive times in terms of economic bilateral relations, and mostly a positive capital, certainly in Portugal, regarding Turkey. Maybe one of the most positive countries within the European Union regarding the country in overall. Thank you.
Thank you very much, José Pedro Tavares, for your words on this very, surely very important topic, which are the bilateral, especially economic relations. I'll give the floor to Ekrem.
Yeah, I also thank all of our speakers. It usually takes some time until we get some questions because they have to be written on the commentary functions on YouTube or Facebook. That's why I will start with one or two questions. Then, of course, you can also ask yourselves. There were some open questions already made, but I would like to ask one question to Mr. Vinyas and Wessels at the same time, and this regards the conclusions of the Council. So the Council conclusions, they have headlines. So Turkey was in the previous conclusions always under the headline Eastern Mediterranean. This was changed now last week to Turkey. There's a huge discussion in Turkey on this, what this means, interpretations on what step that is in normalization. I was today in a meeting, there were also Turkish diplomats, and that this is a sign of one step forward. I would like to ask Mr. Vinyas how it came that Turkey was put again under the headline of Turkey, and to Mr. Wessels whether we are not a bit over-interpreting this headline change.
Do you want to start, Wolfgang, please?
You know more about the draft.
Yes, precisely. I want you to start. Well, I mean, I can react to that, and also one or two comments on previous interventions. On that, well, first, I'm very happy that happy to know that the European Council conclusions are read by many people, and there are so many people interested in reading it in detail, because with dozens of European Councils in my CV, sometimes I feel that we spend many hours in drafting sessions, and there is no one is reading them, but that's very good to know. Second, on the issue of the heading, I think as Wolfgang Wessels made a long interpretation of the content of these last conclusions, and that was I think a sign of the will of the EU to engage in a positive agenda. I mean, Eastern Mediterranean was clearly the agenda of 2020, a quite negative and confrontational issue, is still there, not solved, of course. It has to be solved through dialogue between Turkey and Greece, and also between Turkey and Cyprus. But we are now in a much better phase of that problem, and I think that addressing having the conclusions with Turkey and sending some positive messages on the constructive agenda, on the positive of building a positive agenda. I think that was the idea and the political rationale behind it. Still on some of the comments that were made before on the rule of law and fundamental rights. I said in my previous intervention that the fact that Turkey is remain as a candidate and a key partner are the two parameters that guide us in our relationship with Turkey. Of course, that as Eva said, and also reacting to Wolfgang, the accession process is frozen. There is no consensus within the Council to defroze it. But still, the issues of rule of law and fundamental rights are a key issue in an accession process. And even more now, we have just adopted a new methodology for enlargement. And we have just had last week also intergovernmental conferences with two candidates from the Balkan region, Montenegro and Serbia, under this new methodology. And one of the elements of that new methodology is to put more emphasis in the issue of rule of law, precisely. I think that, so. This is one issue. On the issue of stick, I think. Although there's no specific or express reference, we recall the conclusions of the March European Council and the conditions established there, and of course that conditionality is more detailed in March. So we do not exclude that, and that's why we characterize this positive approach as phased and reversible. It's incremental. It depends very much on the mutual interest and the reciprocity. Also, on the question on the political contacts from the Portuguese presidency, just to mention or to recall that in January we had the Turkish minister in Lisbon. In the first days of the presidency, it was an important visit and duly coordinated with the High Representative. And we also had in the days after the Greek and the Cypriot Minister for Foreign Affairs. So that was also an important political diplomatic operation, and also it has allowed us to make our own assessment of the situation and how these three very important stakeholders on this issue assess the situation. So I will close this, but just to react very briefly to some of the points that were made before. Thank you.
Please, Professor Wessels.
Yeah, for me, it's always a mystery how words are coming into the conclusions. I study them now for quite a lot of time, several decades. But sometimes I'm just puzzled why certain words come up, why some disappear suddenly. And it reminds me very much of my colleagues in the literature department who look at translation of Shakespeare. And each time they discuss if Shakespeare is well translated into German, because new translations mean different meanings of Shakespeare. So let's say I have no real clue why Turkey comes up. I guess, let's say, there is a more positive mood on that than Eastern Mediterranean, which indeed is, let's say, was very much oriented on the conflicts in the Eastern Mediterranean. So I think it might be a sign, a positive sign, but
exactly.
I've not been sitting in the rooms of drafting it. Fortunately, I think that's not always an easy job. So I think that's a point. I would like to mention what Eva said from Ankara. I think disappointments, I think, are on all sides. And I think we have to live with that. And we have to see what the European Council is strategic interest in really having, and I would say more than just a relationship, but a good partnership. I think that needs to be always on our mind, even if there are, from time to time, rather disappointments. Our chair mentioned that I'm teaching at the Turkish-German University in Istanbul. There's a lot of young Turkish students who, most of them really still today, I mean, after being informed about many things, want Turkey to join the Union. So there is this kind still. We might be surprised after the long debate in the EU. There's still a very strong trend to be part of this. And I would say for young people, it's still attractive in many ways. That's not just a political part, but also an economic part, a cultural part, that our Turkish students are very much interested in being part of Europe in a general sense. So, and we have to live with that disappointment. And I'm like Eva, quite often confronted by students, by colleagues with this situation. And I think we should be clear that it's frozen in the moment, that the general conditions are not pointing at a more constructive future in terms of membership. And I think with that we have to live and to see how we work on the problems on the agenda. I think that's important for us. At least that's my understanding. And let's say perhaps we from the ivory tower look also more into the future than diplomats during presidency, which have to work for the day-to-day. I know how time-consuming this is. I mean, we have done a lot of studies on presidencies, and we know how much people were from the presidency country involved, engaged, taken up by the heavy workload. And let's say we can sit back a little bit and say, let's look in a longer term perspective and add what the presidency has done to a longer term way of reflecting about the relationship. That would be my point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I now have a question for José Tavares. These bilateral relations are very, they are in fact growing, but I would like to ask about another player in these bilateral relations, which is the triangle Portugal, Turkey, Africa. What is the role of Turkey here? What is the role of Portugal in terms of facilitating bilateral relations with Portuguese-speaking countries with Turkey?
Thank you, Isabel. And indeed, that's a very good point, and it offers a lot of potential for enhancing bilateral relations. Well, you all know about the historical relations between Portugal and Africa, particularly the Portuguese-speaking African countries. Well, Africa has assumed a lot of relevance and importance in Turkey. Turkey has been investing immensely in Africa in the last decade for a number of reasons. for geopolitical advantage, for economic reasons, a lot of raw materials, and also huge markets in Africa. Turkey has opened over 20 embassies in Africa in the last 20 years. Turkish Airlines is now one of the airlines. Again, Turkish Airlines as one of the tools that very often the Turkish government uses in their economic and geopolitical advances. Turkish Airlines now offers excellent connections using Istanbul as a hub to many African countries, and therefore we start to see the presence of Turkey even in the former Portuguese colonies, the Portuguese-speaking African countries. Guinea-Bissau, the tiny little Guinea-Bissau, just opened an embassy in Ankara. And there is now an ambassador of Guinea-Bissau in Ankara. TICA, the Turkish development agency, is present in most African countries, including Portuguese-speaking countries. And this is indeed, I think, offers potential, if not for collaboration, at least for exchange in terms of Portuguese and Turkish bilateral relations. If you allow me, I would like to come up from Portugal and Turkey to actually European Union and Turkey bilateral relationships. And I think that one thing I would like to say, and this is talking with my Turkish contacts, my Turkish colleagues, people in the Turkish government I know, from a political point of view, the EU is becoming increasingly irrelevant in Turkey. When Turkey, it was said that the membership process is frozen, is effectively dead. When that was alive and kicking, this relationship, which was very structural, very formative, really carried some stick and some weight in Turkey. This is completely gone. The relationship from a political point of view these days is much more transactional, case by case. You win one negotiation, you lose one negotiation, and the EU lost the importance it once had in terms of influencing the political space and the political action in Turkey. Turkey, though, is still very dependent on the EU from an economic point of view. And that is what I did say about the Portuguese-Turkish bilateral relations, which are positive and good, in economic terms, and maybe focusing on this economical relationship and using it as a tool to at least try to gain some progress or to have some progress in Turkey in these more political issues would be possibly the most pragmatic and effective way. Just a suggestion.
Thank you. I would like to ask another question also to José Tavares. Do you have any information on golden visa applicants, Turkish golden visa applicants in Portugal? From my contacts, my Turkish friends know of several people who are applying, and because Portugal is basically seen as a safe destination, a friendly destination.
Indeed, this still is, but particularly was. You all know that the process in Portugal also got its own controversies and scandals, and therefore, has changed somehow. But in the past, it was certainly very attractive and continues to be very attractive for Turkey. In fact, at one point, Turkey was the third country after China and Russia applying for this scheme. So quite a number of usually wealthy Turkish families and Turkish businessmen did go through the process and invested, particularly in the real estate sector, buying houses. Many of them have actually then with the turn of events in Turkey and with the degradation of the political atmosphere and even of the economic atmosphere in the country, many of them then moved to Portugal and transferred part of their investments and their economic activity to Portugal after having obtained a residence permit first and then a passport through the golden visa scheme. So this also contributed certainly to the enhancement of the economic bilateral relations between the two countries, and is an aspect that contributed to these exchanges between Turkey and Portugal.
Ekrem, if you don't mind, I have another question. Yes, the golden visa, and as you mentioned, as José mentioned at the beginning of his intervention, there are other investments outside the golden visa scheme, which are the Turkish Jews applying for Portuguese nationality, and many of them are actually creating their own businesses here, which is also very interesting. I actually did some work on that, and it's actually, as far as I know, over or about 5,000 Turkish Jews who applied for Portuguese citizenship in a universe of around 18,000 Turkish Jews. So this is also very interesting. But I also have another question, maybe for the remainder of the panel, which is several of you talked about how Portugal has a good image in Turkey, and especially José Tavares also mentioned this, and you mentioned that it is the European Council which actually decides on the issue with Turkey. But my question is, the presidency of the EU, and in particular certain countries, and in particular Portugal, and I know that the Portuguese image abroad as a diplomatic country. I mean, we also have the president of the Secretary General of the United Nations is António Guterres, as we all know. So Portuguese diplomacy is very skillful and is promoted by the Portuguese governments abroad. And I also have some feedback from the European Union that in certain issues are directed to Portugal. Portugal takes center stage in those diplomatic efforts. So my question is, regarding Turkey, the fact that some countries taking over the presidency, is this viewed as a certain of having a certain influence in how the Turkey's accession to the EU operates? I mean, if a country taking over the presidency is in a way, I would say, closer to Turkey or seen in a less negative light, can that make a difference in order to step up the accession process? Again, I would direct this question to our panelists, all of them.
Okay, if you want, I could take up the last question. I would make some comments to others. The last question is, there's a famous wording that presidency is responsabilité sans pouvoir. You have a certain responsibility, you have to work hard, you have to find consensus, but you don't have a real power to do so. And that includes, let's say, also the larger countries. Sometimes, if the larger countries like Germany in the financial crisis had some means at hand, if you want, then of course it can play a larger role perhaps. But even then, it was the presidency of the European Council who did most of the work. And it was mentioned before that since the Lisbon Treaty, both in the European Council, like in the Foreign Affairs Council, it's no more the rotating presidency, which is important, but the, let's say, full-time persons who have been elected there for this purpose. So let's say, I think, and the other members, that's, let's say, the result of our studies, all the other 26 are carefully watching that the presidency are not doing things which they don't like. This was especially true to the last presidency of France under Sarkozy, when he launched a couple of initiatives which for all the rest looked very much French oriented. And they stopped him on making of this initiative, if this was correctly or not. So I think we have to see that presidencies have a limited way. They can move things a little bit on the agenda, but let's say at the end, it's really a consensus among 27. And I guess the people who are doing the day-to-day jobs, the permanent representatives in Brussels, are very much, let's say, skilled to stop others if they are too pushing too far and too hard. At least that's what the anecdote, if you want, anecdotal evidence tells us. Let me make 2 points. First, I think it's very important to have this kind of information about the social and economic context. And I think that's for many of the EU countries. I mean, there are 4 flights per day from Cologne to Istanbul alone. In the night, now during holiday times, there are 5 flights in the night to Antalya and to Istanbul, Izmir, Bodrum, etc. So there are a lot of these contacts in Cologne. If you come to Cologne, I recommend you to go to the mosque. There's a modern mosque there, which was built by an association, the Germans think very heavily depending on Turkey, or the Turkish government. But this mosque was built by an architect who normally builds Catholic churches, yeah? Just to give you an impression. And this mosque is really fascinating. So I want to mention that this is a dimension you always have to keep in mind. And I guess also for the EU policies that, for example, Germany with a large Turkish origins, not necessarily always only Turks, but they have a double passport or only the German passport, to be careful in the dealings with Turkey. Now, we have also to be very careful to understand these people with a Turkish passport, because there are sometimes those who are in opposition to the present government. So let's say a lot of the political cleavages which are in Turkey are now also in Germany. And I would guess in the Netherlands, I don't know about Portugal, but in the Netherlands I heard the same. So we have to see this kind of context. Let me make just one remark about the golden visa. Let's say, as a German and European citizens, I don't like that at all. I don't have anything if people want and have the qualification of becoming whatever of the 27 after they doing language tests, etc., which is taking place in Germany, to get a passport, a German passport, a French passport, a Portuguese passport. But it was clearly said it's a question of wealth. And let's say, I don't know in which ranking Portugal is, but there are tough competitions from Cyprus and from Malta for that. And to be frank, as they are then my co-citizens, let's say we are all citizens of the European Union, and they have special rights. We should not forget about it. They have the rights to travel freely, to work freely all over the EU, which I think is highly important, that everybody has the right to do so. That's one of the big advantages and achievement. And this right is being sold by Malta, Cyprus, and also Portugal, I think, I don't like it, to be frank. I think that's not the way to become European citizens. Nothing against having a proper process of becoming a national of one of the member countries. In Germany, you have to pass a certain test of languages and knowledge about Germany, which this test is not always very good test. But let's say at least there's a procedure, and whatever your wealth is, whatever your background is, you could become a German citizen, therefore a European citizen. But to sell it I think that's, in my point of view, not the proper way. Okay, that's a political statement, I understand that. But generally, I think we have to be very careful to see all this, and therefore it was very good to have the Portuguese, to show at the Portuguese links, that there is a lot of economic, social, cultural changes between Turkey and the EU countries. And I think in many ways the EU still is very attractive. My Turkish colleagues, when studying in Cologne, there were a couple of Turkish colleagues with whom I had close contact. They are, at least before the corona virus, traveled regularly to Munich and to Berlin to go into the opera set. That was, let's say, a major part. And I think this attractiveness is still there. Last point, I agree that, of course, a country where the membership negotiations, the accession negotiations have been stopped, is much less oriented on the Brussels arena. That's quite clear, because membership negotiations are a tough exercise for everybody to, not only the political criteria, this is, let's say, the general point, but to get to the acquis, as this is called, that means to accept in 34 or 35 chapters all the obligations which the EU countries have agreed upon among themselves. So to become member is a very tough administrative economic process. And of course, if you are no more in the line of that, at least for this time, then the impact is being reduced. I totally understand this kind of attitude. At the same time, I think it would be a mistake of Turkey not to watch carefully what the EU is doing, because it's still the neighbor with most economic contacts. So let's say, I think the immediate impact has been reduced, and I understand why this is the case. It's a logic of membership negotiations. At the same time, of course, it would be, let's say, not very wise from the Turkish side to say EU is no more of interest for us. In some other of my teaching obligations at the College of Europe, we have now more British students, by the way, who are civil servants of the United Kingdom, who are sent to the College of Europe to understand the European Union, which is now more important than before, because before they were always a part of this kind of union. So they didn't need to be told what is happening. Now they need to look carefully at what is done in Brussels and the national capital. And I think the same is for Turkey. And as I understand, some of my Turkish colleagues, especially also in the Foreign Office, they understand this issue. They understand that Turkish diplomats, Turkish civil servants, Turkish students, Turkish entrepreneurs have to know how business are done in the European Union.
I saw that Mr. Vinhas opened his microphone. So
yeah.
So
just a couple of comments on previous interventions. The first also on bilateral between Portugal and Turkey. Just to, I mean, José Tavares made a good assessment, and it coincides with ours or with mine. I mean, we have, generally speaking, a good bilateral rapport with Turkey. I mean, both in political and economic elements, dimensions. In the recent years, economics were clearly the front runners. The pandemic has not helped, of course, in the last 1.5 years, but that's systemic, not only between Portugal and Turkey, it's between everyone, everywhere, unfortunately. And but there is even more than trade is foreign investment from Turkish investors, particularly from Istanbul in Portugal. That's clearly. We also have a political framework that was agreed between 8-9 years ago between the Portuguese government at the time and the Turkish government that provides us different levels of consultation until summits between prime ministers. But particularly we have an economic commission that probably will meet in the second half of this year, and overviews the economic relation, and has proved to be a very important and useful tool. Just to make a point on the Visa Gold issue, reacting to Wolfgang. I mean, with nuances and differences, there are this Visa Gold issue exists in around 20 member states in the European Union. And in the Portuguese case, we don't sell citizenship. We sell, if we may use this word, but the investment, it goes beyond the platform that we have established, allows a visa to be resident in Portugal. No passport, no nationality. So this is, of course, there are 2 or 3 or 4 member states that offers only also the nationality and the passport, but that's not our case. So this is just to be more precise on this issue. On the presidencies, of course, that and answering to Isabel, I mean, the accession process is frozen. We know the reasons why. It's difficult to have a consensus in the council to resume that process. After the last 1 or 2 years, 2020, I think that this option of a positive and constructive agenda, it's also a good option in relaunching the relationship or the partnership between the European Union and Turkey. Portuguese influence as a presidency, I mean, I would not be so negative as Wolfgang said. It depends on what we are talking about. Of course, that big countries have more power than small countries. That is much more. That reality is much more bolder in the international arena than in domestic politics. It's what it is. I mean, big countries have more power than smaller or medium size. But it depends very much on which dimension of the EU we are talking about. There was a substantive and very important change in the EU with the Lisbon Treaty. All the external relations area are now being conducted by the EU institutions. And not by the rotating presidencies. That's a big and important change, and it had impact. For instance, in our presidency, the watermark of the previous Portuguese presidency used to be the external relations, summits with Africa, summits with Brazil. In this one, we were not. It was not in our hand to have, although we had a summit between commons. Meeting, technically it's a meeting of the leaders of the European Union with the Prime Minister of India. We have a meeting, a summit with India, but we had to change the approach that we had in our 3 previous presidencies. And for instance, our watermark in this presidency was the social dimension, and we have a social summit. So it's when we talk about external relations, clearly the rotating presidency has less power than it used to have. If we talk about the internal dimension of the European Union, I think the presidency, if there is a will, and I think we have made progress in many files during this semester, still has a lot of power. If it has the negotiation skill, if it demonstrates to the member states that it is an honest broker, so it has the ability and the power to move things on. And And I think that we did it in this semester, and any member state can do it. But in the external dimension, it's more difficult because it's up to the High Representative, the EAS, and at the highest level, it's the the President of the European Council. Apart from the Commission, which also has an important role, but so it's not so much with the member state that has the rotating presidency in each semester anymore. So it's the treaty is named after my town, but it's the fact. So we have to change the approach. We were very much in '92, in 2000 and 2007, our three presidents. Our watermark was to have a strong and bold message of an open Europe, open to the world, and the global Europe was. But this time was more difficult. Although we have promoted and organized in Porto a summit with India, which I think it was quite successful, particularly in the economical dimension. There was a complete stalemate since 2013, and we were able to have a breakthrough and to relaunch the negotiations on a free trade agreement, on geographical indications, and investment agreement. And India, it's of course a very important actor not only in the Asian. In Asia, but also in the world. So it was also important. Just to give you an overview on this issue, because it's not we cannot just say it doesn't have power or it has power. It depends on the areas, it depends on the country, it depends on the profile, it depends on the political will, it depends on the negotiation skills. But in this case, of course, I mean, we need unanimity, and there's no unanimity in the Council. I'm speaking under the control of Eva, but political control, I hope. Thank you very much.
We thank you, and we also have to wrap up now. When Ahmed Davutoğlu was Prime Minister in 2015, he said that Portugal was the country that best understood Turkey within the EU, and even not as directly, but kind of you confirmed this during this webinar. I want to thank Isabel for co-organizing this webinar, to our four speakers for their important contributions, and also a big thank you to our EliaMap colleagues for the technical support. And before closing, I would like to add that on 13 July, we will have another webinar on Turkey and the Global South. And until then, we wish you all a nice summer. Stay healthy and see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you. Thank you.